Hello, everyone. Welcome back to a new episode of the Spiritual Inspired Show. I am your guest, Claudiu Murgan. For previous episodes, please visit auraverse.network, spiritualinspired.ca, and our YouTube channel. My guest today is a fellow Canadian, Blaise Kennedy. Blaise, thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, happy to meet with you. I look forward to our discussion.
You have an interesting journey, and this journey towards the work you began after a difficult period in your life happened, due to a kind of a tragic event in your life. So, looking back, how do you interpret that moment of rehabilitation program? Was it a crisis, a catalyst, or a form of awakening?
I think when I went to a treatment center when I was 24, this is what you're speaking about. And the way I would describe it is that I was actually not mature enough to kind of take the reins or sit in the cockpit of my life. I was very much a passenger. And what happens developmentally for children when they get to be about 24 years old is as I've been told, is their prefrontal cortex comes online. They begin to have metacognition. And so for me, it was really a convergence of two things: is my childhood came to an end, and I began to be able to be present and really pay attention to life. And unfortunately for me, I had really struggled with what had accumulated through my childhood, and I was very, very disempowered at that point. So it was sort of like I was just waiting until I had enough capacity to deal with my life. Up until I was 24, I didn't have the capacity to deal with my life, and I really struggled. And then I gained the capacity in the form of a crisis. And really, since then, that was kind of the beginning of my ability to actually put effort in to try to really be present in my life. And yeah, and then I get to choose what I wanted to do with my life rather than be a passenger.
Yes, and you mentioned that you started to be aware of your life, and I want to give a mundane example of what that awareness could be in our day-to-day life. We recently purchased a terahertz machine that's good for your, blood work, cellular development, and the detox. And we plug it in the wall, power it up. We use it in our front room, and I realized that I was listening or hearing a beeping from the garage. I didn't pay much attention, and we kept using the machine for 2 days. And then one day I wasn't able to open up the garage door. I said, "Oh, the fuse blew up." I went downstairs. I pulled the fuse back, and then next day I used the machine again, and I heard the beep again. So then I start putting one and one together, that the power in that room is connected to the power in the garage, and the fuse will blow up every single time. But I had to pay attention and make the connection of these two events in order to realize, okay, I have to plug this machine somewhere else and then be attentive and see if something else will blow up. Correct?
Right. Otherwise, it just keeps happening and you don't know why. And more
Exactly.
more broadly for me, having experiences sort of not about my garage, but about me and my life more personally, I realized that paying attention could actually be an activity, not just something that I stumbled into from time to time, that I could choose to live my life by being present. And, my whole life I'd thought that I was really intelligent. And I was really confused why my intelligence didn't manifest as a good life. It was confounding to me. Everyone said I was intelligent. I said I was intelligent, and yet my life was horrible. And it was no product of this intelligence. And it just kind of dawned on me, my intelligence actually comes from my ability to pay attention and be present. It's a product of presence. And then I thought, well, no wonder I haven't been successful at anything. Like I've not really cultivated this at all. In fact, I've done the opposite. Most of the time in my childhood, I was really trying not to be present because there were so many difficult things that I didn't know how to be with. So I was actively moving away from self knowledge. And then it sort of all made sense. I just do the opposite of that. I just gain self knowledge. I just pay attention to what's happening for me, be empowered, and then I just watched over and over again and improved my life.
Yes, and another example of, being smart versus wisdom is the farmers in the old age or people living in the village. They didn't know how to write and read, but they were watching nature and they knew exactly when to plant their harvest and, the seeds and everything else. They had that type of intelligence and wisdom, which we kind of lost over the years, over the generations. And we think that if we go to university and get good marks and diploma, then we are very smart and intelligent.
Yeah, that's the culture that I grew up in, and uh, I would not have sought out that sort of wisdom until I needed it. And then I realized, I can't go to the traditional sources in my culture for this wisdom because no one else has it. There's very few people at the time that I could recognize that had it. I went to an Alcoholics Anonymous program and Narcotics Anonymous program for a while. And people had some of it there. They had some basic principles, like really broadly, you should be honest. Like being dishonest is really not good for you. And I thought, wow, that's a really good idea. And so, I learned these basic principles, and that wasn't enough for me. So I started meditating and eventually found my way into sort of spiritual teachings that could guide presence more directly. And then I was really off to the races when that happened.
Nice. And after leaving the treatment center, you ask yourself a very powerful question: how far and how deep I can take this? So, what answers have you discovered so far?
Uh, that's a big question. Well, the context of that was I'll give you an example of how I learned that. I learned that really practically because I realized I actually didn't know a lot about how I felt or what was happening in my body. This was pointed out to me. And, I would say something and people would say to me, and this one particular counselor one time that I really remember, he said, "How do you feel when you say that?" And I remember I had no idea. And I just had this realization that I'm just saying things that are not at all connected to what's happening for me. And I thought, well, like, why am I talking? Like, it was embarrassing. Why am I talking if it's just words? Like, it's disconnected from any sort of lived reality. And I thought, that's such a strange thing to do. I've never realized I do that, but I absolutely do that. So I started to pay attention to my body. And what I realized is that I held actually a totally different story of life in my emotional body, which I began to have access about. And I made to realize that my body was holding a ton of energy, a ton of information I was not aware of. And so very much I had this question come out of this experience like, well, what else is in there, right? If there's this inner space that I don't know about, like how deep is this inner space? How far is this inner space? And if you ask the question like, what have I learned about that? I mean, I could talk for hours. I mean, that's there's a lot. Help me simplify or have a framework for how to spend such a rich question.
And do you think that this transformation requires a breaking point necessarily, or can also come out of pure curiosity?
Well, absolutely, there was pure curiosity. I don't think there needs to be a breaking point at all. And I teach now, and when I teach, I try to avoid people having crises. I try to help them to avoid those because human development is supposed to flower. The in my view now, the design or the potential design of our consciousness is to be awake and develop awake as a progressive process through our whole lives that we flower into awakening. It's for me, it's very unnatural that we actually experience this journey that's so common that I've experienced. We're lost, we suffer, we have to figure out how to get out of this problem, and then we have to kind of come back into ourselves. That's for me a product of living in a really traumatized and dysfunctional world. So that's what's kind of normal in the West. That's how we think about spirituality, and we even romanticize it like, wow, I had this huge insight later in life. And again, I think now it's not supposed to be like that. You're supposed to grow naturally into a developed consciousness progressively from your process of incarnation through your whole childhood up into adulthood. That should be natural. So some people retain more of that, some people retain less. Obviously, I'm telling you, I retained very, very little. I got myself in a lot of trouble. But there are many, many people who retain more. And a lot of my work is to actually chart out with people that entire developmental path so that awakening becomes a natural product rather than something that we're trying to like figure it out or break through. I don't think that's really necessary. I think it comes naturally when certain conditions are created, and we can talk about those. But no, I don't think it has to be. I don't think it has to come directly out of suffering. It's very common that it does, but it doesn't have to.
Dear friends, I would like to personally thank you for your support by watching Spiritual Inspired show, joining Oraver's network, and promoting us to the world. We try to bring fresh information and knowledge to those who are looking for a personal development, who want to watch um, those spiritual leaders and people who waken up to their full potential, telling about their experiences and their journeys. Please go on YouTube and join our channel. It's under my name, Claudiu Murgan. And also tell your friends about joining Oraverse network. We are here for you to enrich your spiritual journey. And until next time, love and gratitude. Yeah, thank you. And you mentioned the dire situation of the Western world and how dysfunctional we are. And it just came to me that when a indigenous community like First Nations in Canada or even those in the US come in full contact with the type of Western society and Western thinking, they also get in time dysfunctional, and we know all the stories that happened with these tribes, and compare that with the dripping of Westerners going to South America for the purpose of learning, for the purpose of accumulating that and embodying that wisdom and be able to transfer it and teach it to others. In that way, with the dripping approach, the indigenous cultures not only will survive, but they will thrive to the Westerners. In the opposite example I just gave, the indigenous communities are being affected negatively. What do you think?
Well, you're touching into the story and the history of the earth. That's exactly it. And it's a really great question to ask a Westerner. Like if our civilization is so advanced, how come it's corrosive to everything that it touches? It's a really interesting question. Um, so in terms of, we could take this in lots of different directions. In terms of what Westerners can do, I think we have a whole multitude of choices. I mean, popularly, 100 years ago, you'd have to make great efforts to go to India to meet one person who had any of this sort of wisdom, or potentially some sort of monastery in the West that, I'm open to hearing that was available as well, or South America. You had to go a long way. But this global integration of awakening is spreading for various ways. It's spreading because waves of teachers went over to the East, gathered experience, and came back. It spread because Eastern teachers came over here. And I would say it's also spreading through the process of incarnation, that beings who have lived and carried this wisdom in their soul arrive all over the world. It's sort of, you can imagine like stitching the world together through the process of being born, dying, and being reborn. And so there is this global convergence that is happening, and the Westerner now has a much broader uh, choice as to how they are going to become informed, including through, I think, increasingly through parts of Western civilization, things that are much more Western and culturally similar than shamanism or Buddhism or Hinduism or any of the things that previously were really the only choice.
Yes, and I think those who were touched by the sacred wisdom from South America or even North America, they tried to emulate those teachings based on the Western thinking. So it make them more appealing to those who think in a certain way, with the end result being the same: increased consciousness, open your heart to love yourself and love others, and do as much good in the world as possible.
And well, I would even go even further to say that the idea that we can do practices to improve our consciousness, I think, is universal through all of these teachings. So the idea that teachings, making time for this, devoting energy to it, is becoming increasingly a thing that we do. So all of these cultures, in different ways, absolutely emphasize spiritual practice. And so this is the thing that I think most broadly we are picking up is, oh, this is actually a thing that I spend my time and energy on. This is a thing that I develop, just like I develop my tennis game, or just like I develop my career. There's this other lane of development that I can go on. And I think Western people are actually quite understanding of that kind of development. We do it in all these other spheres. And so I think we take that on quite naturally. Just how we do that in a way that's really authentic and effective and respects the traditions that we come from. That's another question.